Okay, today we will be looking at the topic pasture and forage crops. Now, forage crops provide the bedrock to sustainable agriculture. Forages play an important role in beef cattle industry while also enhancing crop diversity, wildlife habitat, and soil ecosystem services. Forage crops can be an important tool for livestock rearers provided the right crops are selected. Careful management is required to ensure that the crop is fully utilized in its most productive and nutritious phase of growth or phases of growth. Now, pests and diseases must also be managed to minimize their impact on productivity. So in this lesson, we will be discussing pasture and forage crops. So let's take a look at what we need to know by the end of this lesson. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to state the meaning of pasture and forage crops. You should also be able to mention the uses of forage crops, also discuss the types of pasture and their characteristics. And you should also be able to list common grasses and legumes used for grazing, stating their botanical names and their characteristics. You should also be able to list the factors affecting the distribution and productivity of pasture. You should also be able to discuss the establishment of pasture. And finally, you should be able to highlight the management practices of pasture. Let's start with some definitions of some terms. Pasture. What is pasture? Now, pasture is a piece of land or field containing grasses and legumes for grazing animals such as cattle, sheep, and goats. People generally think that when you mention pasture, you're actually referring to the plants, but that's a wrong concept. Pasture has to do with the land or the field that contains grasses and legumes for grazing animals, such as cattle, sheep, and goats. Now, forage crops. What are forage crops? These are the grasses and legumes that are grown specifically and primarily for feeding livestock. So those grasses and legumes are referred to as forage crops, while the field is referred to as pasture. That's the field upon which the forage crops grow is referred to as pasture. Now let's take a look at the uses of forage crops. One is that they serve as feeds for livestock. So forage crops are usually used to feed livestock like the cattle, the sheep, the goats. They are also used as cover crops. Now, cover crops can also be referred to as smoother crops. Now, these are crops that have a spreading ability and they help to protect the soil from the impact of raindrops and harsh weather conditions, especially raindrops on the soil. And these cover crops are usually leguminous crops or leguminous plants. So most forage crops, especially the leguminous plants, serve as cover crops which add nutrients to the soil because of the bacteria that is found in the root nodules of these leguminous crops, which is Rhizobium leguminosarum. And this helps to convert atmospheric nitrogen, that is nitrogen in the atmosphere, into nitrogen that can be used by the plants. And remember that nitrogen is a macronutrient that is needed by plants in large quantities. So cover crops serve a very good purpose to add nutrients to the soil, and they also help to control weeds because of their spreading ability. Now you can see that sunlight is needed for plants to grow. And once these cover crops shield certain plants or weeds growing beneath, those weeds will not be able to thrive because of lack of sunlight. So this is one of the uses of cover crops, which is a forage crop. Now, we're still talking about the uses of forage crops. We have prevention of erosion. Now, when forages are grown on land, they help to prevent erosion. How is this possible? Because a bare land will encourage the runoff water. That's the flow of water on top, which is called runoff water. Now, with forage crops being planted on a piece of land, that will prevent runoff water from occurring, and that will help to prevent water and wind erosion as well, because the surface of the land is not exposed, it's being covered. Okay, some can be used as mulching materials. So some forage crops can serve as mulching materials, thereby helping to conserve soil moisture by preventing evaporation. You can see from the picture what the farmer is doing. He's using some residue, or the leftover parts of the forage crops, to serve as a mulching material on the field around plants that are growing. And this also helps to conserve soil moisture by preventing evaporation. Now, hay can also be prepared from forages. So hay, straw, silage are prepared from forage crops and can be preserved for future use for feeding our livestock animals, okay? So for temporary roofing as thatch, you can see from the picture, these are the straw that is left over after um, from crops like or plants or weeds like the guinea grass and the elephant grass. Such structures, which is a part of the forage crop, which is elephant grass and guinea grass, can be used for roofing our farmstead that you can see in the picture here. They can also be used as animal bedding materials. You can see most forage crops serve as bedding materials for farm animals. Now, farm animals also need some form of warmth and comfort whenever they are being housed. So we shouldn't think that they also do not need that warmth and comfort. So this should be placed on the floor of the pen, and this helps to provide some comfort to the animals. They also help to absorb moisture. When the animals defecate or urinate, this can also serve to absorb the moisture from their urine and from their feces. So they serve as bedding materials. So let's look at the types of pasture now. We have the natural pasture and the artificial pasture. Now, what is natural pasture? Natural pasture, first and foremost, also refers to as natural grassland or rangeland. Now, in this pasture, grasses and legumes grow naturally on their own by rainfall, and they make up about 83% of the natural grassland. So examples of the natural grassland are the savanna areas of Nigeria. Let's look at the characteristics of natural pastures. One is that natural pasture contains poor quality grasses and legumes. Remember, they grow naturally on their own, so the idea of selecting good quality grasses and legumes is omitted. And so these grasses and legumes grow at will, and usually they are of poor quality. Now, it contains soil types that are also low in fertility because there's no management practices being carried out, or no management practices being carried out on this natural pasture. So fertility is usually low. They also contain a wide variety of grasses and legumes which may not be eaten by livestock. Remember, it's natural. There was no selection process that took place there. So certain grasses and legumes just grow at will, and this may not be palatable to the livestock, which may be avoided by the livestock. Another characteristic of the natural pasture is that it has good regenerative ability. That's the ability to grow back after being browsed or fed upon by animals. So these are the characteristics of natural pasture. Still on the characteristics of natural pasture. So grasses in natural pasture can withstand trampling by farm animals. You know, when animals are grazing on a pasture, they tend to step on the forage, and that's called trampling. And this could affect the pasture, but in terms of the natural pasture, they have the ability to withstand trampling. New growth is stimulated by burning. Now, when pasture is being burned, remember pasture is the field upon which forage crops grow. When it's being burned, new growths can easily be stimulated. They are also drought resistant. We're talking about drought where we talk about inconsistent or rainfall or inadequate rainfall. So these pasture grasses are the natural pasture has the forage in the natural pasture has the ability to resist drought. Productivity is also low. Remember, they're also of low quality, so productivity is usually low, and they contain some grasses which cannot be easily eradicated. Now let's look at artificial pasture. This is also referred to as established or sown pasture. From here, you can see the word established means it's deliberately planted by man. So they are improvised pasture. Now, in this pasture, grasses and legumes are deliberately planted and managed by man to be fed on or grazed on by livestock, such as the cattle, sheep, and goats. Let's take a look at the characteristics of artificial pasture. Here, selected grasses and legumes are grown in adequate proportion. Take note of the word selected. So you can see it's a deliberate act. Selected grasses and legumes are grown in adequate proportion. The proportion are 60% grass, 30% legume, and 10% of weeds. Now it contains very high quality grasses and legumes because these grasses and legumes were selected by the farmer. It also has a high ability to regenerate after being fed on by animals. So after being browsed on or fed on by animals, this artificial pasture has the ability to regenerate, that's to grow back. And it has the ability to withstand trampling by farm animals. So remember I said trampling has to do with that stepping activity carried on by animals. They are grazing, they are stepping on the field itself and on the forages that are grown, and these forages have the ability to withstand trampling. The legumes help to enrich the soil with nitrates. Remember, legumes convert atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogen that can be used by plants, and the form in which nitrogen is used by plants is called nitrates. Now, if properly managed, the mixture provides a balanced diet for animals. Remember, you can see there's a selected proportion of grasses and legumes where we have 60% grasses, which are rich in carbohydrate, 30% legumes, which are rich in protein, and then weeds. So if properly managed, the mixture will provide a balanced diet for the animals. Let's look at some common grasses and legumes of livestock. Here we have the elephant grass, which is Pennisetum purpureum, that's the botanical name. We have the guinea grass, which is Megatarsus maximus. Megatarsus maximus, which was formerly called Panicum maximum, but now is referred to as Megatarsus maximus. We have the giant star grass, which is Synodon plectostachum. You can take a look at the picture so you can identify them. The goose grass, Eleusine indica. We have the carpet grass, Axonopus fisifolius. You know, carpet grass was referred to as Axonopus compressus, but there's an update to that, so it's Axonopus fisifolius. Then we have the blanket grass, which is the Axonopus compressus. We have spear grass, which is Heteropogon contortus, which was formerly called Imperata cylindrica, not cylindrical, cylindrica. There's no L at the end there, so it's presently called Heteropogon contortus. We have the Bahama grass, which is Synodon dactylon. So these are the pictures for us to have a view of the various types of grasses. We have Pogon grass, which is Imperata cylindrica, which is what is referred to as Pogon grass. So that's the botanical name. Remember, there's a rule for botanical names. We have the first word here is a generic name, and this second word is a specific name. So this should start with a capital letter, then every other letter should be a small letter. And with this rule here, any letter that is omitted will end up making you to fail that botanical name. So you must learn the names properly. We have northern gamba grass, which is Andropogon guyanus. We have southern gamba grass, which is Andropogon tectorum. We have the legumes now. So we're done with grasses. So we're looking at, there are other grasses, but just to mention a few. So we have some legumes, which is, the first we have here is centro, which is also called butterfly pea. And the botanical name is Centrosema pubescens. We have stylo, which is Stylosanthus gracilis. Remember, the botanical name should be underlined separately, not together. Then Kudzo or Puro, which is the botanical name is Pureria fascionoides. We have Calopo, and that's the common name is Calopo. The botanical name is Calopogonium leuconoides. Calopogonium leuconoides. Then we have Mucuna. Mucuna, which is also referred to as velvet beans or devil beans, is called, the botanical name is Mucuna utilis. Sun hemp, the botanical name, the common name is sun hemp, the botanical name is Crotalaria jonesii. So let's look at factors affecting pasture distribution. Starting with climatic factors, as the type of climate in an area will influence the type of vegetation in that particular area. So the elements of climates which have a direct influence on the distribution of pasture are rainfall, winds, temperature, cloud cover, relative humidity, sunlight, to mention a few. Now, soil factors, which are also referred to as the edaphic factors, refers to the level of fertility of the soil. Now, a fertile soil will tend to support pasture growth, while a poor soil will not. Now, soil factors which influence the distribution of pasture are fertility, soil pH, soil texture, soil structure, and topography. Biotic factors, which has to do with the living factors. So these factors are the disease, pests, parasites, predators. They do influence the distribution of pasture as well. The activities of man, such as bush burning, overgrazing, also has an adverse effect on the distribution of pasture. We have other factors like pollution, which is still caused by human activities, topography, economic factors too. These are some of the factors that could affect the distribution of pasture. Establishment of pasture. Let's look at how a pasture should be established. Now, this establishment of pasture takes the following sequence. First, you have to select your site. A suitable site should be selected, which should be well drained with good loamy soil. Next, we have is clearing of land. The land should be cleared by cutting down vegetation. Removal of debris. Now, debris on the site should be removed. But that's unwanted things and materials that are found on the land should be removed. Then stumping. This has to do with the removal of roots and stumps of trees that have been cut or felled. Then cultivation of site. The land should be cultivated by way of plowing, harrowing, and ridging. I believe that has been taught under machines and machineries and implements, where we talk about plowing, which is a primary implement because that's the first implement you use on a land. After that, you harrow. Next, you ridge before you plant. Now, planting of pasture crops or seeding, that's the planting of the seeds or seedlings of the desired grasses or legumes is carried out. Supplying is the next thing you would do. Supplying has to do with planting of materials that fail to germinate or replacing of, they should be replaced with new planting materials. That materials that fail to germinate should be replaced, and that process is called supplying or filling in. We have promotion of tillering. Now, grasses should be cut back at regular intervals to enable them to grow. That is termed promotion of tillering. Weeding, this should also be done at regular intervals, especially at the early stage of the pasture where you're removing unwanted plants. Fertilizer application is the next thing you should do while establishing the pasture. You should apply fertilizers at the appropriate rate by broadcasting. Remember, we have different ways of applying fertilizers. We have the ring method, we have the side placement. Now, we have broadcasting. That's what you will use in this method. It's a method applicable for pasture. We have irrigation next. That's artificial application of water to your pasture. And paddocking has to do with breaking the pasture into sections. This enables good grazing management so that when the animals can be controlled in terms of their grazing, so that they don't graze indiscriminately, and this could prevent overgrazing. Because when you put it into sections, when the animals graze, for example, in section A, they are not grazing in section B, section C, section D, and with time, you shift the animals to graze in section B while allowing the section A to regenerate. That's a process. So let's look at the management practices in pasture. How do we manage pasture? One is you should use suitable forage species. So use the most adaptable species of grasses and legumes. There should also be adequate stocking. That means the correct number of animals should be placed in the section of a pasture to graze. Remember, that section has to do with paddocking. So you place the correct amount of animals. This helps to prevent overgrazing. Burning should be done once a year, especially when the forage crops are matured, and this encourages regrowth of grasses and legumes. Fencing and paddocking is also a management practice. This has to do with partitioning of the pasture into sections called paddocks. And this helps to facilitate or allow rotational grazing. As you can see from the picture here, this is the first section, this is the second section, the third section. So once they graze in this portion, after some time, they will now graze in the next portion, which is this, while allowing this portion to regrow, to experience regrowth. And after some time, they also graze in this third portion. Okay. Fertilizer application now. Application of fertilizer in the pasture will enhance rapid growth of pasture for optimum production because of the increase in soil fertility. Weed control is another management practice that should be carried out. This helps to remove unwanted plants from the pasture to prevent competition for plants, nutrients, and space. Pests and diseases should also be controlled by using of pesticides to control the pest and certain chemicals to control diseases. Irrigation should also be carried out. This is artificial application of water to your pasture, and this helps to keep the pasture fresh and succulent all year round. Okay, thank you. Let's just have a recap on what we've learned. So in this lesson, we stated the meaning of pasture, which is a piece of land on which forage crops grow. We also defined forage crops as grasses and legumes used to feed livestock. We also highlighted the uses of forage crops, which include livestock feed, cover crops, prevention of erosion, and also used as green manure. To mention a few, we also classified pasture as natural pasture, which occurs naturally, and artificial pasture, which is also known as established pasture. We stated the factors affecting the distribution of pasture, which include climatic factors, edaphic factors, and biotic factors. We also discussed the establishment of pasture, which includes site selection, clearing of land, removal of debris, clearing of site, planting of cover crops, planting of legumes, formation of tillering, that's cutting back your pasture and your forage crops to encourage regrowth, then weeding, fertilizer application, irrigation, and paddocking, which has to do with the separation of your pasture into sections. We also discussed the maintenance practices of pasture, which includes burning, which encourages regrowth, fencing, application of fertilizers, weed control, pest and disease control, irrigation, and adequate stocking. So we have here, which of the following plants is a pasture legume? The first option here is Synodon plectostachys. We have Stylosanthus gracilis, Panicum maximum, Pennisetum purpureum. All of these, except Stylosanthus gracilis, are grasses. So the answer here is Stylosanthus gracilis, which is a legume. The common name is stylo. The remaining are grasses. We have the elephant grass, the guinea grass, elephant grass, Panicum maximum, and we have still a Synodon plectostachys. We have the Pennisetum purpureum. These are all grasses. So the answer here is Stylosanthus gracilis. Now, this next question says, examples of cover crops are, remember, cover crops are also referred to as smoother crops. They have this spreading ability, and they're usually leguminous crops. So the first option we have is Centrosema pubescens and Mochina utilis. We have Calopogonium muconoides and Gliricidia sepium. We have Moringa oleifera and Imperata cylindrica. We have Panicum maximum and Pennisetum purpureum. So the option here have a mixture of both legumes and grasses, but from my observation here, the first option, which is Centrosema pubescens and Mochina utilis, are leguminous crops. That combination are both leguminous crops, so they are the cover crops. For the others, we have a combination of both leguminous and grasses. So the option here is A. So I encourage you to check up some other questions just to evaluate yourself on the knowledge you've gained so far. Thank you.